Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. This episode is a 2-for-1 special, as we'll take a look at the Hawaii Express and Air Hawaii. The origins of the Hawaii Express go right back to 1973, when longtime Honolulu resident Michael Hartley founded Island Pacific Air, later known as Air Hawaii. They would operate inter-island flights with a single aircraft and later grow to a fleet of 8 aircraft and 91 staff by the time he sold it in 1978. He then started a new company, AeroCo, a certified repair station operating at Honolulu, which he sold shortly afterwards in 1979. Founded in early 1982 by Michael Hartley, the Hawaii Express filed for its paperwork and soon received its Air Operator Certificate. This allowed it to apply for route authority on what the US Civil Aeronautics Board considered Route 348, Los Angeles to Honolulu, and immediately ran into trouble. World Airways, who already operated a twice-daily flight between Los Angeles and Honolulu, filed a motion with the CAB with several complaints about the newcomer. World Airways alleged that the Hawaii Express had already been actively engaging in air transportation without the board's authority, and also raised concerns regarding the money already received from future bookings. Rather harshly in its complaint, World suggested to the board that they delay certifying the Hawaii Express for at least 6 months as a warning to that company and the industry at large that the board would not tolerate such activities. The fact that this new airline would compete with World Airways must have been purely coincidental. While the CAB had already completed its fitness investigation and found that the Hawaii Express was both fit and able to engage in air transportation activities, it had to entertain World's complaint. The allegation that the Hawaii Express had been engaging in air transportation was in relation to the publicity campaign launched by the new carrier that spring, as well as taking reservations and other sales activities before the board had certified the carrier. While the board had increasing concerns about the practice of pre-certification sales and the risk imposed on potential passengers, the board did acknowledge that a complete ban on such activities would impose a costly barrier on the entry to new carriers. This was because all new applicants face substantial startup costs, as equipment and crews must be brought in before they gain final approval from both the FAA and CAB. At the time of the investigation, the Hawaii Express had collected around $1.4 million in advance sales and had deposited these into a savings account. This required the signature of both Hartley and the airline's treasurer. This was the basis for the second part of Ward's complaint, and was upheld by the administrative law judge that was presiding over the case. He ordered Hartley to place the funds in either an escrow or trust account, which Hartley complied with. By placing the funds in such an account, it protected the passengers' money should the venture fail. However, this meant that the airline would only access the funds when those passengers travelled, and thus limited their early cash flow. The board outright rejected World's suggestion that they make an example of the Hawaii Express. They believed that the airline had acted in good faith in its pre-certification sales activities, as the board had previously allowed this, and felt it would be unfair to hold this airline accountable for activities that the board had previously allowed. The board had accepted the judge's conclusion that the airline had not intended to misappropriate the pre-sale funds, and were impressed with the efforts to resolve the issue. The board had also reviewed Hartley's 1977 conspiracy conviction. This was in relation to a 1975 conspiracy to import drugs into the USA, in which Hartley's involvement was limited to handling a $2,000 check. The CAB understood the circumstances around it, and accepted that Hartley was both very remorseful and ashamed of this conviction, and that it should not stop his involvement in the Hawaii Express. The board granted the Hawaii Express a certificate to operate its LA to Hawaii route, with it automatically coming into effect on the 2nd of September. The airline, however, asked if it was possible to bring this forward so they could begin operations sooner. The CAB approved this request. August 26 would be the earliest that the paperwork could be processed by, and thus the Hawaii Express was in business. The airline had leased a Boeing 747-100 directly from Boeing. This aircraft was number 36 off the production line, and was previously delivered to Alitalia in 1970. Maintenance would be carried out by TWA, and Transamerica would be on call to provide a backup charter aircraft should the 747 have difficulties. According to court documents, the lease of the 747 was over $4.6 million per year. However, this also included spare parts and a spare engine. Still, this was quite a bit of money for a newly formed airline. The airline's single jumbo jet had 491 seats packed inside the vast economy cabin, and would operate a single daily round-trip flight, departing Los Angeles at 10 a.m. and Honolulu at 2:40 p.m. The early promotional fares were touted at $89.95 one way, with them eventually rising to $125, and the airline expected to have an average load factor of just over 74%. The fares offered by the Hawaii Express were far lower than the competition, and thus every flight was packed, as folks could now afford a holiday in the exotic islands. While the Hawaii Express mainly dealt with individual bookings, they also did have several agreements with travel agencies who were keen to jump into this expanding market. One such agency was based in Salt Lake City and became the Hawaii Express's biggest customer. This small travel agency was owned by a young entrepreneur named David Neeleman and ran initially from his parents' kitchen table. Neeleman had managed to strike a deal with a condominium owner over in Hawaii, then began renting them out at $50 a night. He packaged these with flights on the Hawaii Express, with the only caveat being that folks had to make their own way over to LA for the flight. Hartley's Airline would hold a block of seats on each flight for Neeleman's passengers, giving both a steady source of income. The Hawaii Express was well liked by its crews. Most had come from Braniff, which had collapsed spectacularly in May 1982. They also came from the likes of Continental, which was experiencing major financial and employee relations difficulties following a hostile takeover from Texas Air, led by the infamous Frank Lorenzo. The Hawaii Express really made them feel like they had landed on their feet, if you pardon the pun. At other airlines, routes to Hawaii would be very high up on the seniority list, but for the guys and girls at the Hawaii Express, it was fair game. According to former crews, they felt like they were at the start of something special, perhaps even the next Southwest-style success story. After a very successful first summer season, the airline looked at expansion. The Hawaii Express would bring in 2 McDonnell Douglas DC-10 Trijets in April 1983. These had a smaller seating capacity than the 747 Jumbo, however, they also had lower operating costs, better fuel efficiency, and cheaper leasing fees, so could have been considered a sensible move. It was at this time that the Hawaii Express livery was revised slightly. The white fuselage with rainbow cheat line remained, as did the mango-coloured tail. However, now a big white silhouette of a pineapple was added to the tail, completing the airline's tropical look. The introduction of the 2 DC-10s also enabled the Hawaii Express to increase its flight frequency from 1 flight a day to 3. Flights would now depart LAX at 6:45 a.m., 11 a.m. and 7:50 p.m. Departures from Honolulu were just before 1 a.m., then at 10:30 a.m. and 3:10 p.m. The Hawaii Express was immensely popular, with almost every flight reported as full, and the competition had started to notice. There were several much larger airlines operating between Hawaii and California. Pan Am, United Airlines, Western and World Airways carried the majority of passengers between them, and they began cutting their fares to tempt passengers away from the Hawaii Express. These airlines were able to drastically undercut the Big Pineapple because they had larger route networks and were able to absorb the costs by subsidising them from their other routes, something which wasn't an option for the Hawaii Express. The board were becoming increasingly unhappy that Hartley hadn't seemed to respond to the aggressive moves from the competition and ousted him. The Hawaii Express didn't have the luxury of a large route network to subsidise a fare war, but they went for it anyway. The airline cut fares to a point where they were actively losing money on each flight as their operating costs exceeded the airfares that they were charging. According to one source, even the magazines that were handed out to passengers were actually coming from crews' homes, just with the address labels peeled off. It really wasn't sustainable, and the Big Pineapple was in big trouble. The Boeing 747 had been withdrawn in May. It was too expensive to operate alongside the 2 DC-10s, and their planned expansion to San Francisco was looking like a non-starter. The airline held on through the summer of 1983 until December 20th, when it suspended operations and filed for bankruptcy the following day. So, what went wrong? The folks behind the Hawaii Express didn't seem to be living in a dream world. They had a fairly sound business plan. The airline expected to make a net profit of over $3.5 million in their first full operating year, based on an expected passenger figure just shy of 270,000. What they hadn't counted on was the competition starting a full-on fare war, something that the Hawaii Express would never have been able to survive. Unlike the competition, the Hawaii Express only had the one route. If it cut fares to match or beat the competition, it would bleed cash until the airline failed, like it went on to do. The competition could serve the same route at a loss, with their fares being subsidised by the rest of their larger route networks. It's not a nice or particularly fair practice, but it is legal unless collusion is involved, like what happened to Laker Airways SkyTrain by British Airways, British Caledonian, TWA among others, but that one is a story for another day. By now you know I like a good twist to a story, and here's two for you. Michael Hartley was undeterred by the failure of the Hawaii Express, and in 1985 he launched Air Hawaii. This airline was also based in Honolulu and would serve Los Angeles and San Francisco using two DC-10 aircraft. In fact, they were the same two DC-10s that he'd brought to the Hawaii Express 2 years earlier. Air Hawaii began operations in November 1985 with just one of the DC-10s. The second one arrived in January 1986 before the airline collapsed and ceased operations a few weeks later on February the 19th. Shortly afterward, Michael Hartley and his wife Sandra would found Cheap Tickets, an airline ticket consolidator which later expanded into a full-on travel agency which really blew up at the dawn of the internet age. The Hartleys took the company public in 1999 and sold the company outright in the year 2000. And what about that young entrepreneur David Neeleman? Well, the sudden collapse of the Hawaii Express caught him off guard. The airline had hundreds of thousands of dollars in deposits for future flights, which was now lost. In order to get better room rates, his company had also paid the condo owners and hoteliers in advance. They weren't keen on refunding his company either. His small firm, originally ran from the kitchen table, might have grown to over 20 employees and make $8 million in annual sales. However, it didn't have the sufficient cash reserves to weather the storm. Neeleman himself later said that had he had more cash, then his business could have been salvaged, with seats booked on other airlines and most of the bookings saved, whilst compensating those who'd lost their holidays due to the disruption. His company didn't have the cash, and so it too collapsed. Following the bankruptcy of his first business, Neeleman went on to work for June Morris. She owned Morris Travel, founded in 1970 and had grown to become the largest travel agency in the state of Utah, and happened to be a friend of his father's. In no time at all, he started to sell package deals to Hawaii again, initially using Hawaiian Airlines, who had expanded out of the island market with a Douglas DC-8 until the authorities banned its use due to a lack of hush kit. The idea remained, however, and Morris Air Service would continue to charter in other aircraft until it launched its own operations in 1992 as Morris Air. Morris Air is a story of its own. However, the airline was sold to Southwest Airlines in late 1993 and was merged into them in 1994. Neeleman spent a brief period at Southwest before helping launch WestJet, a Canadian low-cost carrier. Next was New Air, incorporated in Delaware in 1998, better known as JetBlue. He also launched Azul Brazilian Airlines and owns a percentage of the Portuguese national airline, TAP. It's honestly hard to keep track with him, as he's also currently working on his latest venture, Breeze Airways, which he's planned to begin flying in 2021. So there you have it, two big twists and two further success stories, which makes a nice change for Grounded. Until next time, thank you for watching.